It was the autumn of 1996, in a quiet lakeside town in upstate New York called Harmon Falls. The leaves had just begun to turn. The air smelled of pine and cider and the promise of a new beginning. On the evening of October 12th, 26-year-old Elise Moran, radiant, laughing, still in her wedding dress, stepped out the back door of the Harmon Falls Grand Lodge during her own reception. She told a bridesmaid she needed air. She never came back. Her veil was found draped over a wooden bench near the water. Her shoes sat side by side on the dock, perfectly aligned, as if she had placed them there with care. There was no body, no note, no sign of struggle. Police searched for weeks and found nothing. The case quickly went cold. Then, 21 years later, one small detail in a family photograph exposed a truth no one was prepared for. What that photograph revealed would shatter everything her family believed and rebuild it from the ashes. If you're new here, a quick like and subscribe goes a long way in helping this channel grow and bring you more stories like this one. We truly appreciate it. Now, let's get into today's case. To understand what happened the night Elise Moran vanished, you first have to understand who she was. And to do that, you have to start with the person who loved her most in this world. Her younger brother, Daniel. Daniel Moran was 23 years old in the autumn of 1996. He worked at a hardware store on Main Street in Harmon Falls, a town of about 4,000 people nestled between two low mountain ridges and the cold, dark mirror of Cayuga Lake. He had sandy brown hair that never stayed flat, a crooked smile, and the kind of quiet loyalty that people only recognized after they'd known him for years. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't loud. But if you were his forever. And nobody was more his than Elise. She was 3 years older, 5'6", with deep brown eyes and auburn hair that caught the light in a way people always commented on. She had a laugh that started low and built until her whole body shook with it. She worked as a second-grade teacher at Harmon Falls Elementary, and her classroom walls were covered in student drawings and paper butterflies and a poster she'd hand-lettered herself that read, "You are braver than you believe." She believed that. She lived it. Growing up, the Moran kids had been close in the way children become close when the house is unpredictable. Their father, Gerald, had left when Daniel was 6 and Elise was 9. Their mother, Patricia, worked double shifts at the cannery on Route 9 and did her absolute best. But there were stretches, weeks, sometimes where Elise was the one who packed Daniel's lunches. Elise was the one who walked him to the bus stop. Elise was the one who sat on the edge of his bed during thunderstorms and told him stories about a magical kingdom where the rain was made of warm honey and the thunder was just the sky laughing. She made the world softer for him. She always had. By the time Elise was 24, she had graduated from SUNY Cortland, landed her teaching job, and settled into a small rental cottage on Birch Lane with window boxes full of geraniums. She drove a used green Subaru with a dent in the rear fender. She went to Sunday dinners at their mother's house every week without fail, always bringing a dish, usually her lemon squares, dusted with powdered sugar, cracked on top in exactly the right way. She was happy, genuinely, deeply happy. And then she met Marcus Bellamy. Marcus arrived in Harmon Falls in the spring of 1995. He was 29, tall, dark-haired, with sharp cheekbones and a jawline that looked carved. He had moved from somewhere downstate Albany, he said, though details were always a little vague, to take a position as a financial consultant at the small regional bank on Lakeshore Drive. He drove a black Saab. He wore pressed shirts. He had the kind of confidence that filled a room the moment he entered it. He met Elise at the 4th of July picnic at Lakeside Park. She was manning the lemonade stand for the PTA. He walked up, smiled, and said, "I'll take whatever you're pouring, as long as it comes with a conversation." Elise laughed. That big, full-body laugh. Within 6 weeks, they were inseparable. Daniel noticed. Of course he noticed. And at first, he was glad. Elise deserved someone who adored her. And Marcus seemed to. He brought her flowers, not the grocery store kind, but real arrangements. Lilies and peonies from the florist in Ithaca. He took her to dinner in Syracuse. He remembered her students' names. He asked Patricia about her garden. He shook Daniel's hand firmly, looked him in the eye, and said, "Your sister is the best person I've ever met." It all seemed perfect. Almost too perfect. The engagement came fast. Marcus proposed in December of 1995, just 5 months after they'd started dating. He did it at the overlook on Sentinel Ridge, with the lake glittering below, and the first snow of the season dusting the pines. Elise said yes before he finished the question. Patricia cried happy tears. The ladies at church clucked and smiled. The wedding was set for October 12th, 1996, a Saturday at the Harmon Falls Grand Lodge, a converted Victorian estate on the north shore of the lake with tall windows and a wraparound porch and a ballroom that still had the original tin ceiling from 1887. Everything moved quickly after that. Dress fittings, caterer tastings, seating charts spread across Elise's kitchen table. She was glowing, radiant. Everyone said so. But Daniel saw things, small things, things that nagged at the back of his mind like a splinter he couldn't quite reach. The first was the phone calls. Marcus would excuse himself in the middle of dinner, step outside, and talk in a low voice for 10, sometimes 15 minutes. When he came back, he'd smile easily and say it was a client. But Elise's expression would be just slightly different, a tightness around her mouth, a brightness in her eyes that looked less like happiness and more like effort. The second was the argument. It was late August, about 6 weeks before the wedding. Daniel had stopped by Elise's cottage to drop off a set of shelves he'd built for her classroom. The front door was ajar. He heard Marcus's voice, not yelling, exactly, but hard, flat, controlled. The kind of voice that is more frightening than shouting because it sounds like a door being locked. "You don't get to question me," Marcus said. "Not about this. Not ever." Daniel froze on the porch. He heard Elise respond, but her voice was too quiet to make out. When Marcus came out 2 minutes later, he saw Daniel standing there, and his face changed instantly warm, easy, that magazine cover smile. "Danny, good to see you, buddy. Those shelves look great." Daniel nodded, said nothing. That night, he called Elise. "Is everything okay with Marcus?" A pause. Too long. "Of course," she said. "We're just stressed about the wedding. You know how it is." He didn't know how it was, but he let it go. The third thing was the lock. 2 weeks before the wedding, Daniel noticed that Elise's cottage, which had never had a deadbolt in the 3 years she'd lived there, now had a brand new one installed on the bedroom door. Not the front door, the bedroom door. He asked her about it. She laughed. "Oh, that. Marcus is paranoid about break-ins. You know how city people are." A deadbolt on the bedroom door of a cottage in a town where people left their cars running while they went into the post office. Something felt wrong. Really wrong. But the wedding was coming. The invitations were sent. The dress was hanging in a garment bag on the back of Elise's closet door. Patricia had already bought a new outfit, a lavender skirt suit she'd driven all the way to Rochester to find. Daniel had written a toast. He'd practiced it in front of his bathroom mirror until the words stopped catching in his throat. He told himself he was being paranoid, protective, that this was just what it felt like to let your sister go. He told himself a lot of things. October 12th, 1996, dawned gray and cold. A skin of frost coated the grass outside the Grand Lodge. The trees along the lake shore were on fire, deep reds, burnt oranges, gold so bright they looked artificial. The air smelled like wood smoke and fallen leaves in the lake's clean mineral bite. The ceremony was at 4 in the afternoon. 63 guests. White chairs arranged on the south lawn with the lake as a backdrop. A string quartet from Cornell played Pachelbel's Canon as Elise walked down the aisle on Daniel's arm, their father long gone, and Patricia too overcome with emotion to manage it. Elise was stunning. Her dress was ivory satin, simple, with long sleeves and a high neckline, not what anyone expected from a woman who wore sundresses and sandals all summer. Later, Daniel would wonder about those long sleeves. Later, he would wonder about a lot of things. Marcus stood at the altar in a charcoal suit, his hair slicked back, his jaw tight. He was smiling, but his eyes, Daniel noticed, even then were scanning the crowd. Not the way a groom scans a crowd, looking for familiar faces. More like a man checking exits. They exchanged vows. They kissed. Everyone clapped. The reception moved inside as the sun dropped behind the ridge and the temperature plummeted. The ballroom was warm with candlelight, the tin ceiling throwing back soft reflections. A local band played standards. Fly Me to the Moon, The Way You Look Tonight. The caterer served roast chicken and root vegetables and a 3-tier vanilla cake with buttercream frosting that Elise had designed herself, with little sugar flowers cascading down the side. Daniel gave his toast at 7:15. He talked about the thunderstorms, about the honey rain, about how Elise had always been the bravest person he knew. His voice cracked at the end, and Elise stood up from the head table and hugged him so hard he felt her heart beating against his chest. "I love you, Danny," she whispered. "No matter what happens, remember that. No matter what happens." He thought it was wedding day emotion, the bittersweet knowledge that things were changing. He squeezed her back and said, "I love you too, Lise." At approximately 8:40 in the evening, Elise told her bridesmaid, Rachel Dunn, that she was stepping out for air. The ballroom was hot. Her cheeks were flushed. She still had her bouquet in one hand, white roses and eucalyptus, tied with a satin ribbon. Rachel offered to go with her. "No," Elise said. "I just need a minute." She walked out the back door of the Grand Lodge, down the stone steps, across the lawn toward the dock that jutted out into the black water of the lake. Nobody saw her after that. Daniel noticed she was gone at 9:15. He'd been talking to an uncle near the bar when he realized he hadn't seen Elise in a while. He found Rachel, who said she'd gone outside. He checked the porch, the lawn, the parking lot. He walked down to the dock. And there, in the thin blue moonlight, he saw them. Her shoes, white satin heels, placed side by side at the end of the dock, toes pointing toward the water. Not kicked off, not dropped, placed, carefully, deliberately. Her veil was draped over the back of a wooden bench 10 feet away, as if she had lifted it from her head and laid it there like a folded napkin. But there was no Elise. The water was still, black and flat as glass. No ripples, no disturbance. Daniel's blood ran cold. He shouted her name, once, twice. The sound carried across the lake and came back to him as silence. By 9:30, the reception had stopped. Guests were outside with flashlights. Marcus was standing on the porch with his arms crossed, his face pale, saying very little. Patricia was clutching Daniel's arm, asking over and over, "Where is she? Where is my girl?" By 10 o'clock, someone had called the police. The Harmon Falls Police Department sent 2 patrol cars and a sergeant named Bill Keough, a thick-necked man with a gray mustache who had been on the force for 22 years and had never worked a missing persons case more serious than a teenager who'd run off to a boyfriend's house. Keough took statements, checked the dock, looked at the shoes, the veil, walked the perimeter of the lodge with a flashlight. "She probably just needed space," he said. "Brides get overwhelmed. She'll turn up." She didn't turn up. By morning, Keough had called in the county sheriff. By noon, there were divers in the lake. They found nothing. No body, no dress, no bouquet. The lake floor near the dock was soft mud and smooth stones and nothing else. The divers went down 3 times in 3 different zones. They came up empty every time. A K-9 unit arrived from Syracuse. 2 German shepherds, trained for tracking, were given one of Elise's scarves. They picked up her scent immediately at the back door of the lodge. They followed it across the lawn, down to the dock, and stopped, right at the edge. The scent trail ended at the water, but not in a way that suggested she'd gone in. The handler said it was as if she'd simply ceased to exist at that point, as if someone had lifted her straight up into the air. It didn't make sense. It just didn't. There was no sign of a struggle, no blood, no torn fabric, no footprints in the soft earth besides her own. The bouquet was never found. Her purse, with her wallet and driver's license, was still inside the lodge on the bridal table. Her green Subaru was in the parking lot, locked, keys in her clutch. Marcus was questioned. He said he'd been inside the ballroom the entire time, talking to guests. Multiple witnesses confirmed this. He seemed shaken, but composed. He answered every question calmly, directly, almost too cleanly, like a man who had rehearsed. But there was nothing to charge him with. There was no crime scene. There was no evidence of anything at all except a woman who had vanished without a trace from her own wedding reception, leaving behind only a pair of white shoes and a veil and a silence that would last for decades. The lead detective assigned to the case was a woman named Carol Fisk from the Cayuga County Sheriff's Office. She was 51, lean, with iron gray hair cut bluntly at her jaw, and a habit of chewing the end of her pen until it cracked. She had worked missing persons before runaways, mostly, and a few custody disputes. Nothing like this. Fisk was methodical. She built a timeline of the reception minute by minute, interviewing all 63 guests over the course of 2 weeks. She pulled phone records for Marcus, for Elise, for the lodge's landline. She checked bus stations, train stations, car rental agencies within a 100-mile radius. She contacted hospitals, shelters, and morgues across 3 states. Nothing. She searched Elise's cottage. It was immaculate. Bed made, dishes done. A suitcase packed for the honeymoon they were supposed to fly to Charleston the next morning sat by the front door. Inside, sundresses, sandals, a paperback novel, sunscreen. Everything a woman would pack if she planned to come back. Fisk searched the cottage top to bottom. She found the deadbolt on the bedroom door and noted it. She found nothing else unusual, except for one thing. In the bottom drawer of Elise's dresser, under a stack of folded sweaters, there was a sealed envelope. Inside was $600 in cash and a slip of paper with a phone number written in pencil. No name, no area code that Fisk recognized. She dialed the number. It was disconnected. She traced it. It came back to a prepaid phone purchased at a Walmart in Binghamton 3 months before the wedding. Paid for in cash. No name attached. One baffling clue. And nowhere to take it. Fisk questioned Marcus about the envelope. He said he'd never seen it. He seemed genuinely surprised, or he was an exceptional liar. Both were possible. The investigation ran for 5 months. Fisk followed every lead to its dead end. She checked Marcus Bellamy's background and found it curiously thin. He had references, a work history, a social security number, everything checked out on paper. But there were gaps. A 2-year period in his early 20s where he seemed to have no address, no employment, no record of existing at all. When she asked him about it, he said he'd been traveling in Europe. He couldn't provide specifics. It was suspicious. But suspicion without evidence is just a feeling. And feelings don't hold up in court. In March of 1997, the case was officially classified as inactive. Not closed, never closed, but pushed to the back of a filing cabinet. One manila folder among hundreds, the name Moran. Elise printed on the tab in black marker. The case had gone cold. The years that followed were the hardest kind, the kind with no answers, no endings, no permission to grieve properly because there was no body and no proof. And always, always, that thin, cruel thread of hope that maybe she was still out there. Daniel moved through them like a man walking in deep water. He kept working at the hardware store. He got promoted to assistant manager, then manager. He dated a woman named Sarah for 2 years. She left because she said he was somewhere else even when he was right beside her. And she was right. He bought a small house on Maple Street with a porch that faced east and a backyard that backed up to a creek. He mowed his lawn. He paid his taxes. He showed up. But every October 12th, he drove out to the Grand Lodge, which had been converted into a bed and breakfast in 2001, and sat in his truck in the parking lot and stared at the dock and tried to understand. He kept a box in his closet. Inside it, Elise's veil, which the police had returned to the family. A copy of the case file he'd obtained through a public records request. A stack of flyers he'd printed himself, with Elise's senior portrait and the word missing in red block letters, that he'd posted in every gas station and laundromat from Harmon Falls to Albany. And the toast he'd written for her wedding, folded into a square, the paper going soft at the creases. He never stopped looking. He called the sheriff's office every 3 months for the first 5 years, then every 6 months, then once a year. The answer was always the same. No new leads, no new information. The file is still open. We'll call you if anything changes. Nothing changed. Marcus Bellamy left Harmon Falls in early 1997. He told people he couldn't stay in a town where everyone looked at him like he was guilty. He moved to somewhere in Pennsylvania. Daniel heard Pittsburgh, but couldn't confirm it. He didn't leave a forwarding address. He simply disappeared, which Daniel found darkly fitting. Patricia Moran did not recover. She kept Elise's room at the old house exactly as it was. The bed Elise had slept in as a teenager, the quilt with the sunflower pattern, the shelf of paperback novels. She dusted it all, every week, as if Elise might walk through the door at any moment and climb back into that bed, and everything would be the way it was supposed to be. She stopped going to church. She stopped tending her garden. She shrank not just physically, though that too. She became smaller in every way, as if the uncertainty was compressing her, folding her inward. In 2004, 8 years after Elise vanished, Patricia was diagnosed with heart failure. The doctors said it was congestive cardiomyopathy. Daniel knew it had another name, a broken heart. She died on a Tuesday in February of 2005, in the hospital in Ithaca, with Daniel holding her hand. Her last words, barely audible through the oxygen mask, were, "Find her, Danny. Please find her." He promised. He stood in the hospital parking lot afterward, in the gray sleet, and he made that promise again, out loud, to no one, to the sky, to whatever force governed a universe cruel enough to take a mother before she knew what had happened to her daughter. "I'll find her," he said. "I will." Years passed. 5, 10, 15. Daniel turned 30, then 35, then 40. His hair thinned. His knees ached in cold weather. He grew a beard and kept it trimmed. He became the kind of man people described as steady and decent, which was true but incomplete, because underneath the steadiness was a furnace that never went out, a low, constant burn of grief and anger and refusal to accept that this was how the story ended. He visited Elise's grave, the empty grave, the headstone Patricia had insisted on, engraved with just her name and the dates 1970 to 1996. A question mark where certainty should have been every Sunday. He brought lemon squares. He ate them alone on the bench beside the stone and talked to her about nothing, about the weather, about the hardware store, about the way the leaves turned every October and made the whole town look like it was on fire. He never said goodbye. He refused. Weeks turned into months. Months turned into years. Years turned into decades. And the world moved on, the way worlds do, indifferent and relentless. And Elise Moran became a name that fewer and fewer people in Harmon Falls remembered. A story that faded from conversation the way a photograph fades in sunlight slowly, and then all at once. But Daniel remembered. Daniel always remembered. Then in September of 2017, everything suddenly changed. It started with a wedding. Daniel's cousin, Laura Moran, was getting married in Burlington, Vermont. It was a small ceremony, 30 guests, a vineyard, late summer lights slanting through the grape trellises. Daniel almost didn't go. Weddings were hard for him, for obvious reasons. But Laura had been kind to him over the years, one of the few relatives who still asked about Elise, who still treated the loss as real and present and not something Daniel should have gotten over by now. So he went. He wore a suit. He smiled when it was expected. He danced one dance with Laura's mother and then retreated to the edge of the party, nursing a glass of wine, watching the celebration from the outside, the way he'd watched most things for the past 21 years. The photographer was a young woman named Jess, who moved through the crowd with a large camera, snapping candids. After the reception, she posted a gallery of photos online for the guests to view and download. Daniel looked through them 3 weeks later, on a quiet evening in early October. He was sitting at his kitchen table, his laptop open, clicking through the images idly. The ceremony, the toasts, the dancing, a nice photo of Laura and her husband cutting the cake. And then he stopped. It was a wide shot of the reception, the vineyard stretching behind the guests. Another winery property visible in the far background across a low stone wall. There were people in that background. Other visitors to the vineyard, blurry, unimportant. Except one. A woman standing near a trellis about 60 yards behind the wedding party, half turned from the camera. She was holding a glass of wine. She was wearing a blue linen dress. Her hair was shorter, darker. She was older, obviously. But the way she stood one hip slightly forward, her left hand resting on her right elbow, was a pose Daniel had seen 10,000 times. It was the way Elise stood when she was listening to someone, when she was paying attention. It was as specific as a fingerprint and as familiar as his own face. His breath stopped. He zoomed in. The resolution degraded. The face was blurry, indistinct. He couldn't be sure. He was never sure. How many times over the years had he seen a woman in a grocery store or on a sidewalk and felt his heart lurch before his brain caught up? But there was something else. On the woman's left wrist, just barely visible where the sleeve of her dress pulled up, there was a mark. A small, irregular birthmark, reddish-brown, shaped roughly like a crescent moon. Elise had that birthmark. Daniel had teased her about it as kids, called it her moon stamp. She used to hold her wrist up to the night sky and pretend to align it with the real crescent moon. He stared at the photograph until his vision blurred. His blood ran cold. Then it ran hot. He saved the image. He printed it. He held it under the lamp on his kitchen table and looked at it until 2 a.m, until his eyes burned in and his hands trembled. And the house was so quiet, he could hear the creek behind the yard, whispering in the dark. It was her. He was certain. She was alive. Daniel called the Cayuga County Sheriff's Office the next morning. Detective Carol Fisk had retired in 2011. The case had been transferred to a younger detective named Paul Avery, who was polite but clearly unfamiliar with the details. "I think I found my sister," Daniel said. He emailed the photograph. Avery said he'd look into it. His tone was the tone of a man who gets calls from grieving family members and has learned to be gentle without being encouraging. "I appreciate you reaching out, Mr. Moran. We'll review the image and get back to you." Daniel waited 3 days, then 5, then a week. Avery called back. "I'm sorry, Mr. Moran. The image is too low resolution for a definitive comparison. Without a clearer photo or a current name and address, there's not much we can do. We don't have the resources to pursue it based on this alone." Daniel heard the words. He understood them. He also understood, with a clarity that felt like a blade, that no one was going to do this for him. He started that night. He contacted Jess, the photographer. She was cooperative, sympathetic. She gave him the original high-resolution file. He zoomed in again. The face was clearer now, a woman in her late 40s, angular features, brown eyes, a few lines around the mouth. She looked like someone who had carried something heavy for a very long time. She looked like Elise, older, changed, but her. The winery in the background was identifiable. A sign was partially visible. Stone. And then it was cut off. Daniel searched every winery within driving distance of Burlington, Vermont. It took him 4 days and 67 phone calls. Stone Creek Vineyards, Shelburne, Vermont, 12 miles south of Burlington. He drove there on a Saturday, 5 hours from Harmon Falls. He brought the photograph. He showed it to the woman at the tasting bar and asked if she recognized the woman in the blue dress. The woman squinted, shook her head. "We get hundreds of visitors a week. I'm sorry." Daniel asked if they had a mailing list, a loyalty program, anything. "We can't share customer information," the woman said. "Privacy policy." He drove home. He didn't sleep. Over the next 3 months, Daniel returned to that vineyard 6 times. He sat in his truck in the parking lot and watched people come and go. He walked the grounds with the photograph, asking anyone who would listen. Most people shook their heads. A few looked at him with that mixture of pity and unease that he had become accustomed to over the years, the look people give a man who is chasing something that everyone else has accepted is gone. He didn't care. He had promised his mother. In December of 2017, on his 7th visit, a young woman who worked the vineyard's gift shop during the holiday season recognized the blue dress. "Oh," she said, glancing at the photograph. Yeah, I think that might be Miss Calloway. She comes in sometimes. Lives up on Ridge Road, I think. Nice lady. Quiet. Daniel's hands were shaking so badly, he nearly dropped the photograph. Calloway, he repeated. Yeah, Claire Calloway. Or maybe Karen. Something with a C or a K. I'm not sure. She usually comes in on Thursdays. Daniel drove to Shelburne the following Thursday. He parked at the vineyard at 10 in the morning and waited. At noon, a silver Honda Accord pulled into the lot. A woman got out. Blue coat, brown boots, short dark hair. She was 50 yards away. She was walking toward the vineyard entrance with her hands in her pockets and her head slightly bowed against the December wind. Daniel couldn't breathe. He got out of his truck. His legs felt like they belonged to someone else. The cold air hit his face, and he tasted copper in his mouth. She was 20 yards away now. He could see her profile, the line of her jaw, the way she walked, that slight forward lean, as if she were perpetually heading into a wind only she could feel. Elise, he said it quietly, almost to himself. The wind took it. The woman didn't stop. Elise! Louder now. His voice cracked on the second syllable. The woman stopped. She turned, and Daniel saw her face. It was her. 21 years older, thinner, her hair dark where it had been auburn, lines around her eyes and mouth that hadn't been there before. But it was her. The same brown eyes, the same slight downturn at the corners of her mouth, the same birthmark on her left wrist, visible where her coat sleeve rode up. It was Elise. She stared at him. For 3 seconds, maybe 4, her face was completely blank, a wall with nothing behind it. And then it crumbled. Her eyes filled, her mouth opened. Her hand came up to cover it. Danny, she whispered. He crossed the distance between them in 4 strides and caught her as her knees buckled. They sank to the gravel of the parking lot together. And she was shaking in his arms, and he was shaking too, and neither of them could speak. The wind blew across the vineyard and scattered dried leaves around them like confetti. He held her for a long time. When he finally pulled back, his face was wet, and his voice was raw. Where have you been? He said. Where have you been? She looked at him with those brown eyes, the eyes he'd known his entire life. The eyes that had watched over him during thunderstorms and packed his lunches and told him stories about honey rain. And she said something that stopped his heart. I couldn't tell you, she said. If I told you, he would have killed you. They drove to her house. A small white clapboard cottage on Ridge Road, set back from the street behind a stand of birch trees. It looked, Daniel thought, remarkably like the cottage she'd had on Birch Lane in Harmon Falls. The same window boxes, the same geraniums, dead now in winter, but the soil freshly turned, as if she'd tended them until the last possible day of the season. Inside, the house was spare and clean. A wood stove in the living room, a braided rug, a shelf of books. On the mantel, a single framed photograph, a picture of Patricia and Daniel, taken at a 4th of July picnic years ago. Creased down the middle as if it had been folded and carried in a pocket for a very long time. She had kept them close, all these years. Elise made tea. Her hands shook as she poured the water. They sat across from each other at a small wooden table, and she told him everything. Marcus Bellamy's real name was not Marcus Bellamy. It was Michael Brandt. He was from Scranton, Pennsylvania, not Albany. He had a record sealed, juvenile for assault. He had a history that the name change and the forged references and the careful, charming facade had been designed to conceal. Elise learned this 4 months into their relationship, in the spring of 1996. A woman had called the cottage while Marcus was out. She identified herself as Karen Oleska. She said she was calling from a women's shelter in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. She said she had been Marcus's girlfriend 3 years earlier. She said he had put her in the hospital twice. She said she had seen a notice about the engagement in a regional newspaper that someone had sent her, and she felt she had to warn whoever this woman was. Elise listened. She thanked the woman. She hung up, and she didn't know what to do. She was already in deep. The wedding was planned. The invitations were sent. Patricia was so happy, the happiest Elise had seen her in years. And Marcus was well. He hadn't hurt her yet. Not physically, but there were signs. The controlled voice. The way he gripped her arm during arguments, always where the sleeve would cover it. The deadbolt on the bedroom door, which he had installed, not for protection from intruders, but so that she couldn't leave the room during his rages. She would lock herself in. He would stand outside the door, breathing, saying nothing, which was worse than screaming. She was afraid. Deeply, profoundly afraid. But not just for herself. Marcus had said something to her once, during an argument, that she had never been able to forget. She had threatened to leave, to tell Daniel. And Marcus had looked at her with eyes that were perfectly flat, perfectly calm, and said, "If you tell anyone, I will hurt your brother, not you, him, and I'll make sure he knows it was because of you." She believed him. Elise spent the summer of 1996 in a state of controlled terror, planning both a wedding and an escape. She contacted Karen Oleska again, through the shelter. Karen connected her with an underground network, an informal chain of women's advocates, shelter workers, and volunteers who help domestic violence victims disappear safely when the legal system couldn't protect them. The plan was set for the wedding night. It had to be the wedding night, because that was when Marcus would be most visible, most accounted for, most surrounded by witnesses who could confirm his location. It had to be a moment when his alibi would be airtight. At 8:40 on the evening of October 12th, Elise walked out the back door of the Grand Lodge. She crossed the lawn to the dock. She removed her shoes and placed them at the end of the dock. She removed her veil and laid it on the bench. These were meant as misdirection to suggest the water, to focus the search in the wrong direction. Then she walked barefoot, in her wedding dress along the lake's edge, through the shallow water, for approximately a quarter mile, until she reached a service road on the far side of the property, where a car was waiting. A woman named Joan, who worked with the network, drove her to a safe house in Binghamton. The $600 and the prepaid phone number in the dresser drawer had been part of the contingency plan emergency resources in case the wedding night escape failed and she needed to try again later. From Binghamton, she was moved to another safe house in Massachusetts, then Vermont. She was given documents, a new name, a new life. She became Claire Calloway. She took a job at a small library in Shelburne. She kept her head down. She didn't contact anyone from her old life, not Daniel, not Patricia, not a single friend, because the network's rules were absolute. Any contact could be traced, and a traced contact could get someone killed. She had wanted to tell Daniel. Every single day for 21 years, she had wanted to pick up the phone. "I almost called you when Mom died," she said. Daniel looked up. "I saw the obituary online," she said. Her voice was barely a whisper. February 2005. I sat in my car in the library parking lot, and I held my phone, and I dialed every number except the last one, and then I put it down, and I drove home, and I didn't eat for 3 days. Daniel closed his eyes. "She died thinking I'd abandoned her," Elise said. "She died thinking I was gone. And I couldn't. She broke, the way a dam breaks. not slowly, but all at once, with a sound that was barely human, a keening that came from somewhere so deep Daniel felt in an air in his own chest like a physical blow. He moved around the table. He put his arms around her. He held her while she sobbed. And he said the only thing he could think of to say. The only thing that mattered. You didn't abandon anyone. You survived. Daniel contacted Detective Paul Avery the following week. This time, when he said he'd found his sister, he had an address, a name, and a living, breathing woman who was willing to tell her story. Avery, to his credit, moved fast. The investigation into Michael Brandt, formerly Marcus Bellamy, was reopened. Avery coordinated with law enforcement in Pennsylvania. What they found was damning. Marcus had not gone to Pittsburgh after leaving Harmon Falls. He had gone to Erie, where he had married another woman in 1999 under the name Matthew Blake. That marriage had ended in 2003 when the woman, a nurse named Donna Whitfield, filed for divorce and a restraining order citing repeated acts of physical violence and psychological control. Donna's filing detailed a pattern that was identical to what Elise described. The charm, the isolation, the controlled voice, the threats against family members, the locked doors. After the divorce, Marcus, now Matthew, had moved again. New name, new city, new woman. Authorities traced him to a suburb of Columbus, Ohio, where he was living under the name Mark Benson, married to a third woman. When federal agents arrived at the house in January of 2018, they found his wife, a school teacher named Andrea Benson, with fading bruises on her upper arms hidden beneath long sleeves. Michael Brandt was arrested on charges including identity fraud, forgery, domestic assault, and violation of multiple restraining orders across 3 states. The case against him was built over 6 months and drew on testimony from Elise, from Karen Oleska, from Donna Whitfield, and from Andrea Benson, 4 women who had never met, separated by decades in distance, all telling the same story. In August of 2018, Michael Brandt pleaded guilty to 12 counts. He was sentenced to 18 years in state prison. The day the verdict was read, Daniel was sitting in the second row of the courtroom. Elise was beside him. She was wearing a blue dress, not the same blue dress, but close, and her hair was growing out, lighter now, closer to its natural auburn. She was holding Daniel's hand so tightly that his fingers went white. When the judge said 18 years, Elise exhaled. It was a small sound, almost inaudible. But Daniel felt it, the release of a breath that had been held for 22 years. Afterward, they stood on the courthouse steps in the August sun. The air was warm and sweet. Somewhere nearby, a lawn sprinkler was running, and the sound of it, that rhythmic, ordinary, peaceful sound, seemed almost impossibly beautiful. "Is it over?" Elise asked. "Yeah," Daniel said. "It's over." She leaned against him. She was smaller than he remembered. Or maybe he was bigger. 21 years will do that. "I want to go home," she said. "I want to go see Mom." They drove to Harmon Falls together on a Sunday in September, when the leaves were just beginning to turn. Daniel took the back roads, the ones that wound through the valleys and along the ridge lines, so that Elise could see the country she'd grown up in, the red barns, the cornfields going golden, the low hills rolling toward the lake. She was quiet for most of the drive. She sat with her hands in her lap and her window cracked, breathing in the air. And twice Daniel saw her close her eyes and press her lips together. And he knew she was fighting something enormous and invisible. They went to the cemetery first. Patricia's headstone was gray granite, simple, with her name and dates and the inscription Daniel had chosen. Beloved mother, she never stopped waiting. Next to it was Elise's stone, the empty one, the name, the dates, the question mark. Elise stood in front of it for a long time. You can take it down, she said quietly. I don't need it anymore. Daniel nodded. He couldn't speak. Elise knelt in front of Patricia's stone. She placed her hand flat against the granite, the way she used to place her hand against Daniel's chest when she was listening to his heartbeat, as a kid checking, always checking, making sure he was real and alive and there. I'm sorry, Mom, she whispered. I'm so sorry. I came back. I came home. The wind moved through the cemetery, and the leaves, red, gold, amber, fell around them in slow spirals. And for a moment the world was so quiet and so sad and so beautiful that it felt like something holy. Daniel knelt beside her. He put his arm around her shoulders. They stayed like that, the two of them, kneeling on the cold ground in front of their mother's grave, while the autumn light turned the world to gold around them. After a while, Elise reached into her bag and pulled out a small container. Lemon squares, dusted with powdered sugar, cracked on top in exactly the right way. I never stopped making them, she said. Daniel laughed. It came out broken and wet and real. They ate them there, side by side, the way they'd always done. And the taste was the same, sweet and sharp and bright, and for the first time in 21 years, Daniel felt the weight lift. Not all of it, not completely. Some things you carry forever, and that's okay. But enough. Enough that he could breathe. Enough that when he looked at his sister's face, older now, marked by years of hiding and fear and loneliness, but still hers, still his, he felt something he had almost forgotten how to feel. Hope. Elise moved back to Harmon Falls in the spring of 2019. Not to the cottage on Birch Lane that was someone else's now, but to a small house on Linden Street, 3 blocks from Daniel. With a porch and a garden and window boxes that she filled with geraniums the first week. She returned to teaching. Not at the elementary school, she wasn't ready for that yet. For the eyes and the questions and the weight of being the woman who disappeared, but at a community literacy program in Ithaca, where she worked with adults learning to read, and where she hung a poster on her classroom wall that read, "You are braver than you believe." She and Daniel had Sunday dinners again, every week, without fail. She brought lemon squares. He brought wine or bread, or sometimes just himself, which was enough. They didn't talk about Marcus, about Michael often. Sometimes Elise would go quiet in the middle of a sentence, her eyes drifting to a point somewhere behind Daniel's shoulder. And he learned to wait, to sit with the silence, to let her come back in her own time. She always came back. The headstone was removed. In its place, Daniel planted a small garden at the edge of the cemetery, Patricia's plot, and the empty space beside it with the kind of flowers his mother had grown. Marigolds, zinnias, late-blooming asters that held their color well into November. The case file was officially closed in 2019. 23 years after Elise Moran walked out the back door of the Harmon Falls Grand Lodge and vanished without a trace. The manila folder with her name on the tab was stamped resolved and moved to a different cabinet. Detective Carol Fisk, retired and living in Florida, sent a card to the sheriff's office when she heard. It said simply, "I always wondered. Now I know. Thank God." Daniel kept the box in his closet. He didn't need it anymore. The veil, the flyers, the case file, the folded toast. But he kept it. Not as a monument to grief, but as a reminder of what they'd survived, of what they'd come back from, of the promise he'd made to his mother in a hospital parking lot in the sleet, the promise he'd kept. Find her, Danny. Please find her. He had. There is a version of this story that people tell in Harmon Falls, the short version, the version that fits on a bar napkin or a news ticker. Bride vanishes on her wedding night. Found 21 years later. Husband was a monster. It's clean and neat, and it wraps up with a bow. But that's not the real story. The real story is about the things we do for the people we love. It's about a woman who walked into the dark to protect her brother and her mother from a man who would have destroyed them. It's about a man who refused to stop looking, who carried a photograph in his heart for 2 decades and never once let it fade. It's about a mother who waited until her body couldn't wait anymore, and a promise made in a parking lot that held up against 21 years of silence and doubt, and the terrible, grinding patience of hope. The people who vanish aren't always running away. Sometimes they're running toward the only kind of safety they can find. Sometimes the disappearance is not an abandonment, but a sacrifice, the most painful kind of love there is. And the truth, no matter how deeply it is buried, no matter how many years of silence are piled on top of it, cannot stay hidden forever. It finds its way out. Through a photograph, through a birthmark, through the particular way a woman stands in a vineyard, half turned from the camera, holding herself the way she always has, because some things about a person don't change, no matter how far they run or how long they hide. In the end, love proved stronger than the darkness. It always does. If this story moved you, consider sharing it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. We bring you a new story every week. Until next time, take care of the people you love. Hold them close and never, ever stop looking.